All right. Woohoo! Sorry about that. Let me
Okay.
put on my headphones.
Okay.
Oops. Now we're good.
Now we are good. All right. Let's just jump into this then,
All right.
because we're already live.
What?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Wow, no chill. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Lagopis,
And I'm AC Racepest.
and welcome to a very special episode of Zootopiology.
Is it?
Yes, it is, because today we have a guest.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more.
He's our resident and biologist and expert of all things science. And yeah, he's been part of one of the teams that's contributing to coronavirus research. Give it up for ENG 050599. I'm just going to call you Ing.
Yep, that's fine. It's actually, the name has a long and boring story with it, but other than that, I just use it all the time. And yeah, so thanks for having me on. And yeah, given the situation that's currently occurring, just being able to come on and explain some elements, and of course, try to wrap all this stuff up into a society like Zootopia. Hey, why not? Should be fun.
Exactly.
What the viewers don't know is that the short story in regards to the numbers at the end, that's actually a social security number. So
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us.
And thanks
No
for
problem,
giving
thanks.
us your private info. Your bank routing number, a few others. It can be used multiple times, yeah?
Oh, yes, all the time.
All right. And yes, we do see your comments, Daniel. Glad to have y'all in the chat. How many people are in the chat right now?
Looks to be about 5.
Okay. Not too bad. Not too bad.
A new world record.
Oh, jeez.
Woohoo! Yeah, says the guy who had like 2,000 people on his live stream earlier today.
Oh man, what a day today was.
Yeah. Before we really get into the meat of everything, let's just take a minute to catch up.
Okay.
How you been?
Whoo-wee. Well, as you alluded to, today was a big day. It was the release of the Bronies React, essentially to the end of My Little Pony, or at least Generation 4 of My Little Pony. So obviously on the side of Bronies, which have been around since 2010, 2011, this has been a highly anticipated project that's been in the works, and I think we surprised a few people today with it, because while people anticipated the reaction side, I think it surprised people to see how many people we brought back for it, as well as show staff that we got involved. So very exciting, very tiring, labor of love, and I was very happy with the product and what we were able to deliver.
Yeah, y'all went all out.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of work, but you wouldn't believe how just up to even this deadline, months later, things were. Like, I literally got someone's footage last night.
Seriously?
Yes.
Dang.
Yeah, that's how tight all of this was. Actually, to be honest, it was 2 nights ago. I just realized. I'm like, no, I rendered it last night, 2 nights ago. But they're all blending together. Yeah, well, now it doesn't help because, as mentioned, the world is dealing with a pandemic, and
It kind of makes things difficult.
Yeah, things have been weird a little bit. But what about you, Andy? What's new?
Well, the world's gone to crap. But other than that, not too much. I mean, I am currently not working because of all this, which is so much fun.
You said you're not working?
No, because
I'm in that same boat.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing like admin assistant stuff at a real estate place, and they got nothing for me to do. Nobody's coming in, nobody's doing anything with housing and stuff. So,
Yep.
I'm on quarantine basically.
Yeah, the just earlier today, out here, I'm in Southern California, and they don't call it shelter in place. I think they call it like safer at home. Like they have all these like
whatever
I feel
they're
like
calling it.
they're making up all these cutesy names for it.
Friendly terms, yeah.
Yeah, and essentially like essential businesses are still functioning, including restaurants. And today I tried to or not tried to. We went to kind of a local mom and pop Mexican restaurant that's nearby, and I went in there and was actually spoke with the owner a little bit about it, and he was just saying like already just how much it's hurting their business. It's crazy. So that's my kind of takeaway is like for those businesses that can still be supported at those times that really are in a pinch already. If you can go out and support them in any way, try to do it because everyone needs help right now, but we can do what we can.
Yeah, exactly. It's so weird. Like, you're living in a time that is historical and people will be talking about in the future, and like, I'm just in my pajamas.
Well, isn't that funny? They're gonna ask, what did you do during the great pandemic? And you can say, well, I hosted a podcast about Zootopia. That was cool in my pajamas.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, it's there. And it's one where right now things are difficult, but it is something that we all have to chip together in order to kind of help things out. I'm located in Ontario, and just what you mentioned, our restaurants, there's no sit-down restaurants are open anymore. It's been completely cut off. Everyone has been asked to, work from home if you can. My institution, there's no, like the undergrads have actually, the lectures have stopped. There'll be no more teaching face-to-face for the rest of the academic year. They're still trying to figure out what to do. Research, of course, when they say try to work from home, that doesn't really happen too often with the scientists. We kind of need our labs. So at least that's still going on. But it's almost like, driving into the lab. It's almost like a disaster flick. I've seen this movie. The idea, just because there's nobody there. The staff is there, but it's having results. We are seeing we're still not over the hump on this one when you look at it, but it does definitely show, just how quickly something like this can occur with modern society. That idea of a disease from literally halfway around the world within 2 months. And I don't actually know if there are any countries that have no cases.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I mean, even Greenland. Greenland and Madagascar have been got, so everyone who's
that's Andy's line. He's like, if we can't protect Greenland, what can we do?
Although once again, this virus, and just to, well, as I said, we'll kind of get into more fun stuff in a bit, but just to point out that there's a lot of worry about this virus, and it's very serious. But in terms of, the pathogenicity, so how strong it is, its virulence, that type of idea, it's nowhere near the top of what we would be seeing here. It spreads far more easily. For those that aren't aware, when we talk about viruses,
and by he means science.
Scientists, yeah, in general, or scientists, medical, all of that. We oftentimes use the term reproductive number or an R0 number. That's under the current conditions, you have one infected person. How many did they infect around? So if the number is below 1, that's great because that means it's going to burn itself out. It's the infection out there. If it's over 1, well, now we have to have spreads, and this is where we have to do something about it. So right now, if we consider the flu, it's considered to be about a 1.2. COVID-19, it's only about a 1.9. It's 1.9 to 2.5, I think, the current understanding. So it spreads faster, and much faster, actually, than SARS and, thankfully, MERS. Those were the two previous coronavirus outbreaks that we had. And if we look at this, where does it stack up? Well, something like the measles. And for those who aren't aware, last year, an absolutely awful outbreak occurred in American Samoa. Multiple fatalities with that, and most of them were under the age of 4. So incredibly, just tragic. The measles has a reproductive value, an R0 value of about 16.
Oof.
And that's why it's so much of a worry. But this one, it's why, 2 meter separation, being sure you clean surfaces, wash your hands. that appears to be enough. It's just the fact that we need to get everybody doing it. Because that's how you that's how you basically, if you stop the spread, obviously this disease will eventually work itself out. However, in terms of long-term vaccine development, we've been hearing lots of stories, but this is just now getting to the testing phase. We're looking at a year to 2 years before those are actually done. And it is because, well, we have to figure out, do they work and are they safe?
Mm-hmm.
And that takes time.
Yeah.
I think in the UK they were offering, they were asking healthy individuals in like the 20 to 30 age range to volunteer to be infected for vaccine research. So at least things are moving forward. And also that age group is one where that's pretty much the lowest risk. And this is why one thing we talk about this all times, the lethality, with this one, it is very much age dependent. And this numbers really do get skewed because if you're over 80, it's not good. You're up at about 14% fatality rate, which is quite high. However, for basically anyone under 50, it's about 0.4 or less, 0.4%. So this is one where, especially now, anyone under 20, it's 0.2. It's basically the flu. But as you age, and in particular in areas where there isn't a good healthcare system, or you have a situation where people try to avoid just due to financial situations or just out of fear, it's that idea of if I ignore it, maybe it will go away. Where you can end up with things getting worse, more fatalities because people don't seek treatment.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, cool. So that'd be why places like Italy have higher numbers, because they've got more old people.
Very much so. And I said I mentioned this up just in a document. Anyone who wants to look, there's a really good website called populationpyramid.net, and it graphically allows you to look at the age distribution for any given country. And normally, for the world as a whole, we see pretty much normal. We have a whole bunch of younger individuals, and as age goes up, as time goes on, you start to have fewer and fewer. Just naturally. When you take a look at a country like Italy, they've actually been having a lot of their young people, in particular, those in the 20s through until their 50s, have been leaving. Whether it be for work or for just any number of cases. So they actually have proportionately a much higher percent of their.
Hello? Ing?
I think we lost.
I think he used up his allotted word count.
There he is.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't even know what happened. Anyways, so yeah, they just have more of their population older than 65, which is the demographic that, of course, is going to get hit the hardest. So if you actually go through and look, even between Canada, the U.S., you'll see that we have smaller numbers of that. And in particular, when we're looking at in developing nations, in particular, where you actually do see these, where they have more of the normal whole bunch of young people, smaller number there, you do see that you're not getting anywhere near as severe an effect that we have. It is something still that we need to be careful, because in that small percentage of people where this virus actually causes, basically, they call it fibromyalgia, where it's basically the lung tissue begins to scarify, and that is a serious medical condition. That's where you have people on ventilators, and even then, with first world nation with equipment, medicine, it can still cause quite a few deaths. Unfortunately, up in Canada, we just announced another 4 fatalities in Quebec. And it's the worst case scenario. So far, all the fatalities that we've had have been when the virus has gotten into a nursing home. Mm. And that's just, worst possible case scenario. Most of the people are elderly. They've had health complications. And this is why now, basically the things like nursing homes, hospitals, it is definitely, if you do not need to be there, you do not come here. They're not, in many cases, the families can take their loved ones out, but they can't bring them back until after this is done. And of course, there's no visitation. There's nothing in these, just because the risk is too high. But that's the type of things that we'd have to do. And of course, bringing this back into Zootopia, the idea of, well, we're one species. So as a result, when something comes in, sorry?
Okay. Hey, I was going to lead into that.
Oh, okay. You go ahead.
Sorry. Hey, but yeah, well, COVID-19 is insane. I mean, it's not as like you're saying, it's not as big a deal as the news is making it out to be, but it is still a big deal.
It is. It is. Well, I said, thankfully, well, there's not a whole lot of good things to say, but thankfully, even though COVID-19, its ability to spread is much higher than we had in SARS and MERS, but people seem to forget that right now, I think the global death rate is about 0.4%. That's based off the WHO stats that, just from today, it was something like there have been 267,000 confirmed cases and 11,000 deaths. About those numbers. And of course, that's going to change. But when we look at, say, SARS, back then, that was a 9% overall. MERS, which was the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, that one was awful. Thankfully, it didn't spread very far because that one had an overall, I think out of the confirmed cases, 34%.
Ooh. Wow.
Fatality. It was bad. Bad.
Black Death.
Well, once again, Black Death, as I think I mentioned there, that actually took out 60% of Europe's population, approximately. They figure about 100 million people died as a result of that, which constituted about 25% of the human population at the time. The estimates are between 100 to 200 million.
Which, wow.
I know. That's why when we look at the diseases here, like the Black Death, it is by far the biggest, single event. There have been diseases like smallpox, of course, was just awful privately. We've gotten rid of that one, thankfully. Even the Spanish flu, when that outbreak occurred, the number of deaths was just amazing. But no, Black Death, it is far and away as it wiped out half of a country, basically half the population of a continent.
Yeah, it takes something real special for a disease to earn a name like the Black Death.
Yeah, it's a well-earned one. And one thing people don't quite realize is that in the U.S., you actually have normally a handful of cases of bubonic plague every year. It's just endemic in the environment. So every now and then you do have it. It's treatable now though, because it's bacterial in nature. And I mean, it's like between 1 and 5 cases on an annual basis. Yersinia pestis is the bacteria that causes it. And yeah, it's one where it spreads by fleas on rats. And well, there are many places with a lot of rats. Of course, back in the Middle Ages, the irony of the whole thing was, they would be blaming things like cats and whatever, when those are actually the best way to get rid of the problem. Having modern medicine that we actually can show, in a controlled setting works, that's great. As opposed to back then where, the phrase, the cure is worse than the disease was actually true in many, many cases.
Ooh.
Huh. Well. That's fun.
Oh, well, so the reason we brought you on tonight, not just to give everyone sort of update on the situation and all that, but you're like the foremost expert on Zootopian biology.
I think I might be one of the only ones, but yes.
Therefore, the foremost.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That does.
You've put so much time and thought and even research into the ideas of Zootopia and Zootopian biology, right?
Absolutely.
You've written a massive fanfic about the consequences of crossbreeding.
Very much so, yeah. I am, and everyone, if anyone here actually reads it, I am still working on it. It's been over a year. Sorry, it's been
a little nuts. Busy year.
Oh, just slightly.
I'm guessing that what it comes down to is, though, as far as the crossbreeding goes, is it should happen between Judy and Nick, and that's all that matters. So,
believe it, it's one where, as I've said, that pairing will never occur in that type of hybrid will not occur in the world of Lost Causes. But I've helped other authors do it, and it's kind of where, yes, I would love funnies to be all over the place, just
Boxes
because, well. Exactly, but yeah, unfortunately, scientist, I've got to just completely just destroy people's hopes and dreams. It's what I do.
Yeah, see,
it's like
that's a human scientist talking. That's a human scientist talking. Yeah. Let's see what the other scientists in Zootopia have to say. That's all I got to say. Yeah. I got my hope. You can't take it away.
Oh no, exactly. And once again, the story can be whatever you want, and as I've mentioned several times with Lost Causes, the idea there is. I want to tell a good story, It just so happens that when you base it on just what we see in the film, the degree of just physical differences that we see, there's obviously major genetic differences that are occurring, and nature's not kind. It's also not evil. It just is. And it's the fact that when you have two individuals where the genomes, their DNA, that's the instructions on how do you build an individual. If those instructions are too different, you're not going to get anything to work. And based on the reality, that's why I want to be able to teach people some science. It just so happens that the setting and the topic is really, really depressing.
Yeah. You don't say.
Oh, yeah. Well, once again,
it's a great fanfic for anyone who wants to check it out, but like you said, it's depressing.
Very much so. And yeah, I always just have this in there where it's kind of, I try never to revel or glorify those elements. It's just something that happens. And fortunately, I think I pull that off more often than not. However, I do also get in the comments of people calling me a monster repeatedly, or just, confessing, just openly weeping. So yeah, it happens.
What have you done?
Basically, yes.
Why would you do this?
Hey, I've been able to teach people a lot of science through that. It's been an interesting one. Some of the questions that have come up have been absolutely fascinating, and that's one thing. What got me started in this community was just randomly online coming across discussions that they were looking at things like, okay, how do interspecies hybrids, how does that work? And that kind of got the ball rolling. And I think Lost Causes originally started out as basically being dared to write, because I'd be talking about just how depressing being something like in obstetrician, that type of work in Zootopia, if you're dealing with these interspecies couples. And people say, it can't be that bad. And it's kind of like, okay, fine, I'm going to write this. I'm going to show you. And that was where the first chapter came out of, and then it's kind of spiraled from there. But at least, yeah, and it does help, especially when you get into the top of this. Yes, it's an interesting world. It's something where, fortunately, my day job is literally working on similar things like this. One with, more direct application. But part of the fun
you don't
of
get
this...
to theorize about Disney movies?
No, unfortunately, they don't allow me to do that. That's all on my own time, as much as it will be. Although I have, in fact, made use
we'll
of...
leave that to you and Saber Race.
There you go.
Theorizing about Disney and stuff. Cartoons.
Yeah. Oh, as I said, I actually did manage to use Zootopia in a final exam. So that's one thing I had to...
Ah, props.
How'd you pull that off?
Well, basically, what I end up doing is it's a class where... it's advanced development, basically molecular developmental biology. So we're talking about embryogenesis, things like that. And I happen to use, and the idea is, this is a fourth-year class. It's really senior, so the questions are normally very open-ended. And I asked, basically, what would the consequences be of a mixed population? I actually used, as an example of Disney's Zootopia, where you have so many individuals there. How would this affect basically selective pressures in the cell? So it was something where I was using them as a way of saying, you have a really, really diverse population. What effect does that have on how things progress, how things change over time? So yeah, it was a loose reference, but I have actually thrown it in there.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's about as far as I... the other one was, of course, just in my own time, something like, I remember when I was working out, and for me, part of the fun is just how far can we explain something like Zootopia with real science. Eventually you do have to get to a point where it's like Disney magic. Yeah, and sometimes it does become really important. In particular, something like evolution. I'm working through this, and I was actually using some of my my bioinformatics servers where they're just population modeling when it's not in use, fortunately. But the idea is...
Here, folks, he's using university supercomputers to figure out how plausible Zootopia genetics are.
Oh, good on you.
Although, those aren't university computers. Those are mine. It's what we're
his own personal supercomputers.
Yeah, not so. Once again, actually, I'm doing a genome assembly on one right now. It always scares me when, let's see, the main one, it's 96 CPU cores and a terabyte of RAM, and I choke that thing just constantly with the amount of data that we throw at it.
A terabyte of RAM?
Terabyte of RAM, yep. It's because, so, very briefly, when you're dealing with DNA sequencing...
know they made them that large.
Well, it's a 4-node server, so once again, this is all basically
Insane. Jeez.
Yep, and we use that all the time. It's mainly because one sequencing run. I just actually had one finished now. So just imagine you have a puzzle with 100 billion pieces.
Okay.
And you don't have a picture on the box. The only thing you can do is basically align those fragments one against the other, and where they overlap, that's where you know they go. So in order to do that, you of course have to have every piece in memory at once, because it has to go and compare each one to every other one and keep on going cycle after cycle after cycle. So that's why you need this type of computational power in order to do it. And it is a nightmare because like one run on some of the newer sequencers, you can have 20, 30 trillion base pairs, nucleotides, bit of sequence. It is absolutely insane. But yeah, so this is one where just going through and doing the modeling, that type of stuff, it's always it's always fascinating. And with something like Zootopia, it's just, you do eventually have to get to a point where it's Disney magic, but it's amazing how far you can get. And what I'm talking about, the evolutionary pathway, one thing that's, people oftentimes don't quite understand is, so when people say, what are the odds that something can happen? Well, or like, how humans evolved or a world evolved, something like that. What are the odds that could happen? You need to remember, well, you're not asking what are the odds that it would happen. You're asking what would be the odds of it happening again. And that's where things get crazy, because if you consider just the number of random events, and the example that I gave in class is, so imagine you start flipping a coin. You flip a coin every 5 seconds. Over the course of the day, a week, a year, what are the odds that you'll be able to get that same pattern again? And when we're dealing with a time frame on the order of hundreds of millions and billions of years, you suddenly realize that any evolutionary pathway, any path to get to where we are now, it's going to be a mathematical impossibility to have that happen again. But it doesn't mean it can't. And this is one thing that you just, when you get into probabilities at this level, it's insane to consider. Because quite literally, tiny changes, we're dealing with, single nucleotides changing in the genome. And that can have a profound effect. In the case of, once again, COVID-19, it's actually got a fairly large genome. But every replication cycle, errors are put in. And that's mutation. That normally, mutations, you have kind of three things. They can either be bad, and so deleterious, they cause harm. Normally, when we're dealing with pathogens, that's a good thing. We don't want them to get better. They can be neutral. They don't do anything. That's actually where most of them fall. Either it hits an area where there's no gene, or when it does switch, it changes the nucleotide, it just changes it to the same amino acid that it would encode for. So basically, you go DNA goes to RNA, goes to protein, and the messenger RNA strands are read in groups of 3 nucleotides. We call them codons, and there's redundancy in the table. So basically, there are combinations where that one combination of nucleotides all encodes for the same amino acid. So if you have one where it flips between those, same amino acid means it doesn't have change. And then, of course, it can be positive. It can be one that actually improves. And this is something where when we look between SARS and COVID-19, there was a change in the molecule that we're still kind of working on it, of course, but it looks like it binds to a different receptor in our cells. So that was where that one allowed it to just be a bit nastier in terms of its spread. But once again, the actual virulence when we're dealing with morbidity, fatality levels, it seems lower, thankfully.
Well, my mind is blown.
That's what I'm here for. But yes, it's fun. But yeah, I mean, and this is something where, as I said, I've got the article that I'll hopefully be able to get up soon. But the idea of a mixed society in Zootopia, when we're looking at that from an epidemiology perspective, it's fascinating, but also terrifying to consider. Because, as I said, right now with COVID-19, we're all humans. So when the disease comes in, it's not like you can miss it. It's one where people start getting sick. We're only dealing with humans, basically. Unless it's something that's going to go into livestock or something like that. But in Zootopia, just consider, if the species are as diverse as what they are here in our world, you could actually have a disease come in where most of the population, it doesn't do anything. It's not going to affect them at all. But it could absolutely destroy one species. And if people aren't looking for it, or just the mammals aren't looking for it, if the health officials aren't looking and monitoring all the time, it's entirely possible that yes, you could have a situation that a disease comes in, wipes out we're talking on the order of 98%. Usually that's what we see of with pathogens. There's some where, unfortunately, the fatality rate is 100%, which is just awful, with the exception of, I think, 2 individuals. Rabies is, of course, one of the more famous ones there. And that one's particularly bad because, well, fortunately, when you start getting symptoms, it's too late. The virus is already into the nervous system, and they're done. And there's only been 2.
To be honest, like, that's what I thought was happening in Zootopia first time I saw it. I thought it was rabies.
Yeah, although unfortunately,
that
with
would
something
be
like rabies,
a zombie apocalypse scenario for them.
Very much. It's 28 days later. That same idea.
Oh my gosh, the sequel is going to be crazy.
Yeah, somehow it's just like, people have commented on Lost Cause and go, oh, this should become a film. No, Disney is never, ever, ever going to answer these type of questions. They are not going to deal with this in any way, shape, or form. Same thing. I don't think we'll ever get an official, Zootopia 28 days later, as amusing as that would be. Although, there's probably, I think there are fanfics and maybe even comics for it. But yeah, it's
they came close. Like like the Night Howlers may have been artificial drug, but like it came close to the same effect.
Pretty much. Well, at least in terms of the hostility. And once again, with rabies, the main thing with there is, fortunately, there are vaccines for it and there are treatments for it. So it is something where when we're dealing with Zootopia, diseases like that, talking about public health, there is no doubt in my mind that there is a comprehensive and mandatory vaccination schedule, in particular for diseases that can't.
No anti-vaxxers in Zootopia.
No anti-vaxxers. Medical exemptions only. Only. And that is it. And it is because the risk is too high. You absolutely need to have that, in this case, quite literally, the herd immunity level. But you need to have that for every species. And it is because, as we're seeing, you do have to have it for a wide range, because what is happening now with COVID-19? That's a zoonotic transfer. That is a disease that has jumped from another mammal. In this case, it's thought to be bats. It's thought to be bats is where the natural reservoir is, and it jumped over into another species, humans. And this happens quite frequently. And what is the main cause of it happening? Being in a location where you have multiple species all in close proximity to each other.
Yeah,
which is Zootopia.
Start in like a wet market or something?
Yeah, wet market, which is fresh. Basically, it's in China. Wet markets are a term used for fresh food. So normally, this is where you go. You have the fresh vegetables, meat, everything. But unfortunately, there is a market there both for food as well as for traditional medicine, where they have multiple wild species. And so you might have heard, like with SARS, it was civet cats was one of the ones they're crossed over from. Of course, when we're dealing with H1N1, the either avian flu, or then we have the others for swine flu. Those are all instances where the disease has gone from one species and either directly jump to humans, or in the case of some of the influenzas, it normally kind of goes from birds to pigs to humans. So it actually has a bit of a jump. But the problem is, yes, you've got multiple species all within a very, very small space. And if you ever looked at the pictures for these wet markets, the sanitation is can be just awful. Like we're talking, you have never seen anything like butchering of animals just in the dirt. They are then just washing the meat out with think of a gutter just was running down the street, and that's the worst possible. There are ones in particular. Well, for instance, something like in Tokyo, in Japan, they also have similar things where there's the famous fish market, where this is where the auctions occur for like really high end tuna, things like that. That place is freaking immaculate. I would have no problem eating off the floor there. And
that's because they are very, very conscious of like possible health hazards.
Absolutely. Whereas unfortunately in Wuhan, which is where this began, it was a traditional market. It wasn't in any way, shape, or form the worst that's out there, but the conditions are just so right for people to come in, because you have predominantly raw, uncooked, living dead side by side at times. Quite literally cages that are stuffed full of animals, and just they're all together in a position where it is. And just think,
I apologize to any of our viewers who have eaten recently.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll try and limit the descriptions. Once again, I'm a biologist.
Make it gross. Make it gross.
Well, it's also more along the lines of it's been a part of just general life as a scientist for so long. It doesn't even faze me anymore. It really doesn't. With the exception of of course companion animals. Anytime you see somebody hurting them, it's just there's that almost instinctive, just no thanks. But with this, and just what I was saying before, so large amounts of species, close confines together, that's Zootopia.
Yeah,
that really is. Obviously, the sanitation level is very different, but we're dealing with a situation where you have species that are interacting together, and they can be quite wide, quite divergent. We're dealing with species that in the real world, they didn't even evolve in the same locations globally.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we do have them all coming together.
Camels with polar bears and
exactly,
and like Cape buffaloes with lambs.
And it's all over the place. There's absolutely it's crazy when you actually consider it.
Yeah, Agent points out Zootopia isn't a crap hole, thank goodness.
Yes. Very much so.
Pretty dang good, standards of sanitation for a major metropolis.
Absolutely,
you rarely see any trash.
Yeah, except for of course in the alley where they're just going through, and we see that was where we actually get to see the Bugger Burger box on that one. But yeah, so no, it is, and we can see that it's obvious that there is a level of personal hygiene there that is not typical in the wild in the thing. So no, you're actually going to have it's a lower possibility, but
it's not even typical in human cities.
No, it's actually not in many ways. Well, of course, right now it's pretty clean because there's no one out and about. But yes, but once again, so in this situation, and this is why it would actually have to be really a unified system that involves regional authorities, the individuals themselves, and just the idea of being aware.
The office of the mayor.
Yeah, very much. Well, that would actually, depending on the government there, because something like this, there would definitely be the mayor often involved, but it might even go higher, of course, to the national level, national, state, whatever their organization is above the city level. Mm-hmm. That would actually be involved because you can't just look at Zootopia, of course. You would need to have data coming in from every other city, every region, because the key thing is the instant that in the hospitals you notice an uptick of a certain species showing up, or even with going to a family physician, if they start seeing, and these numbers, they might have to be anonymized and reported. So basically you don't get the patient information as to who they are, but you might just get an idea of this species went to here for something like this. And all that would then be gathered because you need to be able to see the instant you have an uptick of one species being overrepresented in the hospital, that's a warning sign. And that's where you immediately have to start looking at, okay, what's the cause? Is this something that we need to take more seriously? And so there would have to be basically an entire infrastructure ready to go for such a thing, because these things can move fast. There was an example of myxomatosis in rabbits, where fortunately it's a double-stranded DNA virus, so it can actually have a vaccine, but that is just we can go through a rabbit population like wildfire. It is insane how big it is. We're talking 98, 99% fatality rate.
Even their viruses are good at multiplying.
Yes, they're better than bunnies. Well, we get into this actually. That was on the cost ascensions discussion that we had. Guess it would have been 2 years ago. Wow. But anyways, that idea of when you deal with reproductive strategies, you can either put a whole lot of energy and effort to a small number of individuals, so you have don't reproduce too quickly, take a long time to mature, or you can just try to outbreed the reaper by going through, and that's what the rabbits do. Unfortunately, that's also what the virus does. Exactly. Yeah. Well, hey, it works. Overall, but yeah, when you do have something like that, and as I said, myxomatosis in particular, that disease is because it really does hit rabbits. So just for those that aren't aware, one of the reasons why is that rabbits are, at least in our world, that couldn't be the case in Zootopia, and I'll get there in a second. Rabbits are obligate nasal breathers. They can't breathe through their mouths well, just due to the way how the soft palate is formed. So anything that causes congestion in the nose, which is one of the major things actually completely block off, they basically suffocate. And there's also, they have these... Jeez. Yeah, it's like a large tumor formation. It works very quickly, but it just happens that because of how rabbits have evolved, it hits them hard because it hits kind of their major weakness. Now in Zootopia, of course, we know that that's not the case. So myxomatosis would not be quite as bad. How do we know this? Rabbits are talking.
Yeah.
they have to be able to breathe through their mouths. So it's something
They
where,
get
and
it.
also, yeah, and we once again went way too far down the pathways. But yes, just a shift in the angle of the skull to spine going into an upright gait would have been enough. So
Huh.
yeah, I spent way too much time on stuff like that.
No, you're asking the real questions.
Yeah. Overall, hopefully I'm right. I said
Yeah.
one thing. Hopefully my hypotheses are at least reasonable, and I don't think anything's happened to completely debunk me yet. But then again, it's not there. So, and once again, this idea of with public health, another issue is, of course, we know that in Zootopia you have haves and have-nots. There is a class system that's present. They picture, of course, some of the conceptual work that was done, pre-production. We know that things could be even worse for predators, given some of them, like the whole bit of with Happy Town and all that. But yeah, so in other words, not only do some predator species they represent a smaller population number, but also in many cases they're a segment of the population that not too many people care about. But you really still have to, from a public health standpoint, it's just as important, because if something is going to say infect a fox, well, that's probably going to hit a bunch of other canid species that are, of higher social status in the eyes of many. So it is something where, like, in particular, that care, it would also need to be something that it's independent of, wealth. It's something that everybody just has it done.
Universal health care.
At least for vaccinations and that type of stuff. Vaccinations and some aspects of medicine, like the screening, or just being able to go in and go to a hospital, get checked out, or to your family physician. Yes, the other stuff, of course, when we get into some of the more
Surgical.
complicated, exactly, and also even necessary versus elective surgery. Those are all things that can be looked at. But yeah, for basic public health, it's not an option, because you can't just assume that, okay, well, we're going to end up losing about 90% of Happy Town's foxes. Does anyone else care? No? All right, let's just go get some lunch. That doesn't work because it can spread, and it can go far. Yeah, it can go pretty fast, and this is why you need to be always on guard. And in fact, in places like that, where sanitation might not be as high, the standards of living might not be as high, nutrition and health might not be as high, just because of the social elements. Well, you would have to be looking there first, because those are all factors in where these things occur.
Right.
So, because of course, if you're dealing with a population where so small numbers, but also economically or physically disenfranchised and poor health, that makes it far more likely for a pathogen to make the jump and to really be able to start going through like wildfire.
And well, yeah, we've got a question from the chat at a DX9901 asks, on that note, I'm curious, would what's happening in countries now be comparable to what could have been going on in Zootopia during the Night Howler panic?
Yes, in some way. Well, as things went on, so
panic buying advisories, etc.
Oh God, yes, absolutely. Well, in this case, because it's limited to certain species, I can actually see the concept of social distancing on an extreme level. Like I would actually, this was done in a few fanfics, including so Wildlick, his 3 Months of Fox. The idea of you suddenly start having prey or predators are being sequestered, like the back of the bus, different cars in the subways, things along those lines. Because right now, of course, it's only ever hitting the Night Howler itself, the disease, if you wanted what they were thinking of at the time. It only is hitting predators.
It looked just like a disease.
Very much so. And since it only hit predators, though,
Weather's plan was so genius.
Fear. Hey, well, we are seeing definitely fear always works. Unfortunately, yeah, it does, and we're seeing that right now. So with this one, because the prey species, it wouldn't, by looking at things, they're not worried about catching it. They're worried about the predators near them being affected by it and then killing them. So we're not quite in an area, because this is obviously where this is about us trying to not avoid spreading and catching the disease, as opposed to more kind of, it's almost like a downstream effect of after someone's been infected, then they go out and kill someone. So it's a little bit different, and I can see it definitely being more of these, like as I said, the social distancing, to the point where if it had continued on, the odds are there would have actually just been like, maybe we'll just call them concentration camps. Just throw all the predators in there. Okay, problems done. We're good. And yeah, I mean,
and that
we'll take a look at what we're doing
to the shock collars, and oh my goodness, they got the
everything else
backwards.
Yep, it's one where it doesn't take much, and as we are seeing here, because yes, so last
And
week, actually.
it's way more dramatic of infection, air quotes.
Oh yes, no, it's obvious. It's one where, like, well, as I said, they go savage. This is something where that is not you can't confuse that with like a common cold. It's just not going to happen like that. So no, it's an obvious one. It's one that also, just because now, since we know it was induced, it's one thing, but no, I mean the risk level, because as soon as that happens, the aggression, then they just immediately attack. So it's something where the risk is so high that it could easily be justified, and that's why when you look at the movie, it was very close to basically being like a Disney version of Schindler's List on its level of just because it's when you think about it, it's there, and since it only affects a small group of the populace, that's why. So
I can imagine just how relieved the scientific community of Zootopia were to find out that it wasn't a disease.
Oh yeah, well, and that's one thing where
community, like everything.
Oh no, and that's one of the things that I actually did in Lost Causes was I had that because really, when you look at what's happening, I was of the opinion that the medical community would have probably always suspected that it's not a normal disease already, just because of the range of species that it hits, the fact that there doesn't appear to be any connection aside from them being predator species, and the fact is that from a biochemical standpoint, there wouldn't be any flags indicating that it's a pathogen or like a naturally occurring toxin. It's one where they would probably have been suspicious for quite a while. Unfortunately, given the fact that the position of the conspirators in in the city hall and everything, they were in the perfect place to just completely screw over any researchers. So you would have things like samples, they went missing, or they didn't get shipped them on dry ice, so they were basically destroyed by the time they arrived. Paperwork getting missed, having trying to get authorizations for people, and just having a constant.
She is the master of missing paperwork.
Yes, very much so. That is true. And because there are so many ways you could do it, and you couldn't last forever, but eventually it was enough to just slow things down to a point where they almost got away with it. And with something like public health in there, you can almost see that, because when you look at Zootopia as a whole, their history would probably be punctuated by events where, once again, a disease comes in and just wipes the community out. And you might end up with something where that would be almost ingrained as part of history. It would be something that I would imagine they'd be taught in schools as part of their history. So you're almost primed.
They're kind of half expecting another Black Death.
They would always be looking for it, and once again, not on the scale that we see, because once again, we're one species there. But no, I can actually imagine. Well, once again, so
more frequent,
smaller, more frequent, but just as deadly. Like, depending on how integrated the societies were, I could easily see, almost, not quite the complete thing of Brigadoon. So the idea, but yes, having entire villages. Someone just goes through it, everyone's dead. The idea of plagues and just having things like that. Of course, there would probably be tales of it. The idea of ghost ship, just having something pull into port and everyone's dead. That could be possible. It all depends on if they're all the same species, and of course the pathogen that's involved. So you just have to be on the lookout for it. But no, their history could be filled with events like that. Things of they can't become legend, myth, that type of idea. But yeah, just think about the Black Death, and now have it. For every species, they have their own smaller one. That idea. And so they'd be on the lookout. They'd be looking, and this is why it'd be ingrained, is that when things start to get a little odd, the suspicion could be, we need to look into this. So right from detection, then of course we get into being able to identify, figure out what the hell we're dealing with here. And with COVID-19, this has actually been really interesting and quite heartening. So the work that I've been doing in this is really limited. Basically, I've just been donating time and some equipment. So we have what's called an Illumina MySeq. It's a next generation sequencing system that we had some reagents that were going to expire in a month, and the student who was going to use them, they had a little problem, and they're now not going to be using that for about 6 months. So it was, hey, what can we do? So right now we're working on some what's called RNA sequencing. So I mentioned before, DNA is the genome. DNA contains the genes that are then basically transcribed into RNA, and then those get translated into the protein. So we have some samples that are actually from a related virus. This one was actually not pathogenic, and we don't actually work with the viruses in my lab because I only have a BSL-2 facility, biosafety level 2. Basically all coronaviruses are under 3. And biosafety level 4, that's the one you see, in the movies where everyone's in like the full. Yeah, there's two in the U.S., one in Canada, and Winnipeg, and there's a few, of course, in Russia, Europe. But yeah, no BSL 4 facilities.
Wasn't there
one
actually near Wuhan?
Yes, there is. BSL well, yeah. I'm actually not sure if it's actually in China or if it was in South Korea. I'd have to check to see where they are, because China actually does have like 4. They have quite a few of them. But so just for those who are aware, so biosafety level 4, that's the highest we get. Those are basically buildings inside of buildings. The entire thing is completely hermetically sealed. It's actually maintained at a lower atmospheric pressure, so that if you do have a breach occur, air goes in, it does not go out. You have to go through multiple stages with airlocks, where to get in, you basically have to completely strip down, you shower, you put on a full suit. So you have seen them, you're in basically a spacesuit, and then you're connected by an oxygen hose to you that you just kind of walk around the lab with. Then before you go in, you're sprayed down with it's basically Lysol or Dettol, one of those, just a disinfectant. You go in, you do your work, everything's done. You're in enclosed fume hoods, even though you're in the spacesuit. And then when you leave, it's the same thing. You go out, you have to get sprayed down. You go out, you then shower yourself, put your clothes on, and all this is in a control space. Level 3 facility is similar, not quite. It doesn't need to be a building within a building, but there is an entry and exit procedure with airlocks that have negative pressure. And yeah, like those are bad enough. Then biosafety level 2, that's a lab. Really, it is. It's one thing. So we don't deal with pathogenic or pathogens in my lab specifically, especially anything of that level. But well, of course, when you track the DNA, RNA, whatever, then we can use it because it's fine. It's safe. So that's what I've been doing there. And that run just finished, and I forwarded the data off. Actually, I guess it would have been on Wednesday. So that's kind of limited there. But when we look at being involved in the community, it has been amazing to see how quickly, and just from all over the world, how many colleagues, scientists have really just come together, and they've managed to do some incredible things very quickly. Normally, when you're trying to do these, identifying the pathogen and getting things like the genome sequence, that normally takes months. But they actually had the sequence from individuals that had been infected. They were able to isolate the viral RNA, and there was actually a genome sequence within a month. Basically, we only first identified the pathogen near like mid to late December. And by mid-January, there were sequences out there. Right now on GenBank, which is a large collection where people just upload nucleotide sequences, so whole genomes, partial genomes, viruses, anything. It's just kind of a clearinghouse for researchers to go. It's publicly available if anyone is interested. And you can actually just see, I gave Andy the link for it, but there are dozens and more every day, whole genomes for this coronavirus. And right now, I'm actually looking at the page right now. If I wanted to, I could download the whole genome, be looking at it. And this is something that happened so quickly. And there's so many of them now that this is amazing. And now just last week, some researchers just down the road from me from they're at McMaster University, University of Toronto, and Sunnybrook Medical Center. They developed a way to culture the virus. And this is a big thing. When you're dealing with viruses, it's important to remember that when they're not inside of a host, they're not alive. They are basically frozen in stasis. They are not considered alive. They have no metabolism whatsoever, and they require a host in order to reproduce. So what we have is a situation of you can't just put it onto an agar plate like you can with bacteria and have them grow. You need to give them the conditions that they want and cells for them to be able to replicate. And this can be very difficult, incredibly difficult. But once again, within 3 months, we have a method now of being able to culture this. And this is huge. Normally that type of work, once again, we'd be looking at terms of, at least 6 months to a year. But somehow, and I don't know exactly how, what the process was, how they were able to get it so quickly, probably being able to leverage, the previous work on SARS or MERS, those type of things. But we have tools now that normally would take years to develop, and it's only been months. So this is absolutely amazing to see. And once again, bringing that back to Zootopia, we're dealing with a situation where that would probably be the same thing. A new pathogen comes up, I can see that being an all paws on deck type of affair. And it would. There would just be no question. It's kind of, for researchers that are in the fields, it would be a drop everything, and it wouldn't even be a question. There would be, of course, the occasional ones who would grumble and things like that, but the risk being so high that, yeah, I really can't see a situation where it wouldn't just be considered as absolutely essential.
Wow. Just imagining the pigs having to deal with swine flu.
Oh, well, yeah, there would actually definitely be a social element, the idea of either social shaming or something, because, well, further on the past, of course, in our own history, where pathogens were being viewed as divine punishment. And so, social stigmas associated with that, they could absolutely be there, in particular for ones that, diseases that have been around for a long time, ones that are cyclical, things like that, because they might be associated with poor hygiene. They might be associated with, only inflicting people of lower social status. So you could actually have where not only are you dealing with a health issue, but also like a mental health issue to add on to it. So, yeah, it's really interesting to look at. And, of course, what we're dealing with right now can be extended over just, once again, this idea of you just have to be even more vigilant, because you might be dealing with something where it's only going to be one species that gets hit. And if they're, 0.01% of the population, you have to be pretty sensitive. You have to have a way of detecting that quickly, or else you can have very bad, a ridiculously bad time. In the case of a zoonotic transfer, so when you have that pathogen go from one species to another, it might be completely novel. There could be absolutely no type of immunity that we have for it. And that's kind of the worst case scenario for it. And, well, we do have an example of that, namely where Ebola, which can be like really nasty, depending on the strain. Once again, you can have the fatality levels for that at 98%. But once again, like I think the last outbreak that occurred, it was only about a 45% fatality rate. But that's another instance where came from bats. Well, they think it's the giant fruit bats was the natural host. It doesn't affect them at all.
Yeah,
they do not.
Are interesting that way, aren't they? Like, they can just have so many diseases and everything and just be totally fine and chill.
Yeah, and well, once again, we also have that. We have tons of bacterial species and viral species in us that can be pathogenic to other species, but they've just evolved to be there. And with bats, the issue is it's more along the lines of just because of how different their life cycle and their just living conditions are, they actually kind of live around where humans are quite frequently. In particular, something like fruit bats, where they're almost ubiquitous in the areas, once again, fruit production in those areas. So it's a possibility where they can interact. And yeah, it's where you can end up with contamination that occurs either on food, people, just environmental, and you just don't know. And of course, then when you add in something like wet markets, because that was where, the example they gave was there were a few pictures that are on that, yes, bats are actually, consumed or used for traditional medicine in some regions of China. Whether or not that was the cause, we don't know. And actually, this is one thing where good news, bad news type of thing is, China did act quite decisively to try and make sure this doesn't happen again by bulldozing the entire wet market. But unfortunately, that also means that we can't go in and now kind of look more closely, because there was a whole lot of kind of, they were back on their heels. They were just reacting to what was going on, and rightly so. I just wish that, if they were, when they decided to bulldoze, and it is, once again, they did it in like a day. They work. China works very quickly. The fact that they managed to build an entire hospital in like 5 days is insane. But it does just show what can be done when basically you have resources and manpower in spades. So it's, well, as I said, there's so much stuff there that you have to be careful with. And with COVID-19, we've got so much information. It's now just a matter of getting this under control, and we know methods that work. So it is, for anyone who's listening here, wash your hands, make sure that you're doing it properly, long enough, use soap. If you are having issues finding hand sanitizer, anything with 60% alcohol is good enough. If it's isopropyl, you can drop it down to 50. And in fact, if you can just get rubbing alcohol, just mix that with some glycerol, which you can find in a lot of health stores, and maybe just something like aloe vera, because it's going to be kind of rough on your hands. That will work. So what you're looking for is like 60%, 20-20 for the other ingredients, and just try. That will work. It's not going to be quite as nice, and obviously no perfumes or anything like that, but it will work. Another one that in the lab, we've taken to just wiping everything down with isopropanol afterwards, after it's being used. It's there, it's cheap, and once it evaporates, it's gone. So there's no real risk involved. So it does work. Yeah, well,
or you could
if you really want to
be like me and be a hermit.
Yeah. Well, once again, lo and behold, scientific community, we have a slightly higher than average number of introverts. For us, it's kind of, geez, we're supposed to avoid contact. How is this different from Monday to Friday normally? So yeah, no, it is.
Telling my sister, like, she is having a rough time with that.
Oh,
she is social
butterfly,
but
the introverts will rise.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It is our time.
Yeah, pretty much. Introverts of the world unite, just for the love of God, not in the same place. But yeah, so it is one where
for the internet and for Discord and places like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, although getting into the idea of vaccine testing, so we've already gone through this, the importance of having these, but what about actually making drugs, medications? Because, well, the basic concept...
That would run into a bit of an ethical dilemma in Zootopia, wouldn't it?
It really would, because a core tenet of toxicology is the dose makes the poison. And in reality, every medication that you take, one dose, you're giving yourself enough of the medication to have the therapeutic effect that you want. But of course, if you go too much, well, you can have lethal results. If you go too little, it's going to be ineffective. So how do we determine these? And that's just it. For us, trial, yes. For us, it's actually pretty easy. We have what's called preclinical trials, which is where that's the base stuff. That's where you're actually going in. And this is the part where it actually be kind of the hardest for Zootopia, because you're looking for things like the lethality, so the lethal concentrations, what doses, and for that we have a whole bunch of them. You might see them written down as LD50, LD100. That's lethal dose 50% or lethal dose 100%, and that is the dose where you administer a set amount and half of your test subjects die. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when the lab rats are sentient, can't do that one anymore. But it even gets a little bit more complicated, because that's obviously the extreme. When we're dealing with chronic, so long-term exposure.
And Agent just pointed out in chat, so what might work for a fox might kill a bunny.
Oh, absolutely. And you would have to get that type of pharmacology would have to be done for every species. You would need to figure out in terms of doses. Now, obviously, some medications wouldn't be meant for some species, but you actually do have to account for different species are going to react differently. As an example, this is an unfortunate one from our world, but for those who might not be aware, North America, we've been having an opioid crisis, where just the number of people that are overdosing has gone straight up. This is mainly people using street drugs, where it's supposed to be heroin, but it's being laced with synthetic opioids that are much, much, much stronger. In the case of one of the
because that's a discussion, like drugs and stuff in Zootopia would be a whole nother science discussion.
Oh, yes, and that's actually what I've been working on. So, yeah, I won't go too far, but yeah, just to say, so for instance, carfentanil.
So the tranquilizers and stuff that they used in the first trailer, that would be a big no-no.
No, exactly. Although it did work out ways on how you could do it. So a bunch of authors that also come with the idea of that ZPD would probably have something like color-coded darts. But also, my idea is you wouldn't be using the normal. So normally, when you have a dart gun, just imagine it's just a syringe, and the where the plunger is, that's just a heavy weight. So the momentum when it hits the target just pushes the drug in there. You don't do that, because that's obviously, it's too variable in the dose, and you can't be sure what's going in there. But if you were to use an auto-injector, something that on the, based on the, well, not the firearm, but on the gun itself, where you can then select a dose, that would be a much safer product, and it will allow for the ZPD to be able to change. You have kind of the large changes in dose would be based on like color-coded darts, green, yellow, red, that type of idea. But then within those, there would also be a series of settings for how much of the drug you're actually going to administer.
That's probably a good idea to be, it's probably good that they didn't have any trank darts in the final movie.
Exactly. No, the tasers, that was the good one.
Mm-hmm.
That works.
Tasers were.
Yep, tasers were, and they would work. Obviously, once again, there would have to be quite a very, very much different settings. I can just imagine and obviously, like the tasers, the ones that actually fire the darts. Well, for a small mammal, the size of those darts might actually be lethal. So they'd also have to take that into consideration. Different, not only different charges, but different sizes on the prongs.
Just suddenly gets stabbed.
Oh yeah, well just that. Yeah, because if anyone's ever seen the darts are not that big, but if you're a mouse, that's deep enough to definitely hit major organs.
I kind of wonder on what you're, because obviously one thing we utilize a lot when it does come to testing, as you mentioned earlier with animal testing, what would be the alternative in Zootopia where you don't have, say, oh, we could test on lab mice. No, you can't. So what would the alternative be?
They're the college interns.
No, that's clinical testing, not the preclinical. So when you're dealing with preclinical, this is where you would actually be able to use, and what I think the most likely option is cell cultures from mammalian tissue, but then also this is where birds and reptiles could be used, but only for these really, the big metrics. You're just trying to see how much of this does it take to kill, and when do we start to see other, negative effects. And the problem is that because we have to cause harm, in order to figure out where, you start to see carcinogenicity or you start to see toxic effects, we need to inflict those. And that's why you just can't go through and, randomly do this. You can't just assume it. You have to go through and you have to measure it. And this is one thing where also in silico, so using computer simulations, those could all factor in, but they all are just part of it. And what would end up happening is the bar to move. So normally when you move from a preclinical trial to a clinical trial, this is where you're actually now going to test for the medicinal effects in humans. There would probably be a lower bar for that in Zootopia, just because they can't perform the same degree of research that we could. But this is the part where, because I said, for being able to cause harm to people, that would be really, really hard to justify in any set, except for like in an absolute emergency situation. Pretty much similar to how things are for us now, where for those who aren't aware, most of our toxicity testing, it's done on mice, rats, and dogs, oddly enough. But in the past, non-human primates were commonly used. So monkeys, and in particular, when you get to the apes, so chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutan, things like that, that has fortunately been almost eliminated, just because as we learn more and more about them, it's suddenly, if they're not fully sentient, they're damn close, and let's not do that. There is an exception in the CDC. Actually, most of the rules are, if it is a viral outbreak, a pathogen outbreak, that there is no other model that can be used, then we can go to those. And something similar would have to be the case of there would be a lower bar for moving that preclinical into the clinical trials, just because we're not going to be there. So the clinical trials themselves are probably larger. And once again, we do hit a problem, though. And as you said, the college students. And even I put down, what I've written says, yes, this is very common. I mentioned the group in the UK for asking for people to be infected with COVID-19. We have the signs up on campus all the time, looking for guinea pigs, as it were. That would definitely be there. But what's the problem?
They'd be looking for guinea pigs in Zootopia.
Pretty much, yeah. But as I said, the other problem, though, is, what type of people or mammals are going to respond to that? It's going to be those that are from, more than likely, lower class of society, those that are poor in terms of finances. So you still have to make sure that you get, because as mentioned, the dose for different species can be wildly, wildly different. So what do you do then? Well, you either have to increase the compensation to a point where finally you do get enough of every species to do, or you start to get down into the, even wrapping it in civil service isn't there, but there might actually be a period, like think of it as forced military service. Well, you are, for this year, you're going to be helping us test a new drug. Because, once again, it's either that or you have to then just assume that it's working. Now, for some species, they might be able to get away with it. So I mentioned before, so like in the canids, so foxes and wolves, yes, foxes are going to be probably in the lower economic status. They might go in for testing more frequently just for finances, but their information could actually just be directly applied to like most canid species. So wolves, any type like that, coyotes, the like.
Right.
But
so
for some species,
Zootopia would by necessity have to have a much more, or like strictly organized, advanced, and coordinated medical system.
Absolutely. It would need to be there just because they have to be looking in so many different directions. In terms of like vaccine development in particular, there's probably a whole series of almost like you say like crisis levels where kind of more and more safety bits get shaved off the worse things get until eventually, you could, well, once again, given the last Ebola outbreak where ZMapp, which was the treatment for Ebola, that had not been approved for use at all. I don't even think it was in a large-scale trial at that point. But the situation was just, we got to do it. We've got no choice, just because the virus is so nasty. So in that case, I can see the similar thing of when you do have something come in, a novel pathogen, depending on how things go, you could very well have it where, almost like if it's a specific population, they might very well have martial law declared. Like that population is put into protective custody. If it gets even worse, well, congratulations. We're doing a lottery system to see who gets to test the new test the new medication or vaccine. And it's one of the things where it would be a necessity. And as I mentioned, there would be that historical context of using it. I think even like in the article that you commented on, I even made the point of, in their society, the use of biological weapons might have actually been more.
That's an article that hasn't quite released yet. We're still in the editing stage, but it'll be one doozy of an article when it's released.
Jesus, guys.
Well, hey, you give an academic an open forum, we're going to fill the space, and we're going to fill it with words. I think the first draft, it was 25 pages.
We have definitely learned that.
But anyway, so when you're dealing with that, it is just a matter of you have to have everything in place. Everything has to be ready. And going through the authoritarian regime, well, you might have to go that route. And once again, I would almost see on a day-to-day basis, you would have, once again, the idea of at different stages of development. The compensation could get, higher and higher as you find out, okay, we got the basic safety testing done. That's the riskiest stage. But when you get into the clinical testing for determining effectiveness, it almost is the reverse. So you pay people most at the most dangerous, but then you also pay people the most when you need to get that last bit of data on there. So you just kind of keep on increasing the compensation. But if you don't get enough, and depending on the severity, well, then you might go into the legislative and basically voluntold system of how things work. And I should just point out that one key thing is right now, like computer simulations, in silico cell cultures, those cannot fully replace whole animal testing. It's an unfortunate fact that, let me put it this way, in terms of cell culture, by and large, when you grow these, they're one type of cell. You have, it's a layer cell. Normally, it's grown. Basically, it's growing on plastic, inside of a flask, and it's one cell type. You might have liver cells. You might have heart cells. You might have epithelial, so skin cells. But that's the only cell type that you have. And the reason is, well, different cells will have different requirements, and in particular, in communication with each other, they can be quite difficult to culture in a mixed system. What that also means, though, is when you're testing something on them, you're only testing it on one cell type. That's not what an organ is. That's not what an organism is. That is a mixture of tissues and cell types. It's all just kind of together. And it's at a point now where for the simulation aspect, we can't perfectly simulate a single cell, let alone a whole organism. One absolutely crazy thing. So my background is predominantly molecular biology. And when you look at the genes that we've gone through, we've sequenced, even in humans, and just to be clear, the overwhelming majority of research in the field of molecular biology, genome sequencing, comparative genomics, it's been all in humans, one species. We've devoted so much time to it. When you look at the human genome,
narcissistic much?
Yeah, it's also just necessity. I mean, let's face it. But no, what is kind of weird is when you look at the human genome. When you look through it, you look at all the genes. I think the number is about 21% of those genes are unknown, hypothetical. In other words, a fifth of the genes in our bodies, we have no freaking clue what they do, where they're expressed, anything like that. And it is because you have events where these might be rare. These are things that might be turned on just for a very limited period of time during embryogenesis or at some other points where you're just not looking when they're being expressed. And so as a result, we just don't know. And for Zootopia, well, I think I've mentioned before that they would probably have more genetic information but they might not have it to a similar depth that we do. What I mean by that is they would have tons of species. The genomes of every major species, I am absolutely certain there is a sequence for. But the amount of actual, like, being able to dig into them might be less and might be only focused on more of the practical applications. And it is just because, well, they have so many species, what do you prioritize? And it's either going to be based off of population size, in which case certain prey species, in particular some rodents, are more than likely going to be the ones that have the most work done, or it's economic. So those that are part of the higher social hierarchy, they would have more done. But on an individual level and overall, like the amount of work that we've done to understand humans, they might not have that. They have a broader spectrum of knowledge, but not as much detailed.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is just absolutely fascinating. I hate to cut you off. Like
I know.
Yeah, we've been going for about an hour at this point.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I kept talking so much. All right.
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, this is all interesting stuff and very topical.
Yes.
Yes. Now, obviously, if anyone does have any further questions, either just leave them here or on Discord. I'll try and get back to, try to get through them there. And obviously, I'm willing to do this again. It just comes down to timing. Right. But yeah, no, we figured when you asked, it was just this situation is. So I'll just close off my contribution here just by saying, so remember, COVID-19, just be sure, follow the directions. If you don't need to go outside, don't go outside. Those of you who are being affected by this economically, make sure to look at what type of aid is being there, both in Canada and the U.S. It's a bit kind of patchwork right now because, of course, it's at kind of a federal, state, local level. But make sure to look because this is something where it's going to be incredibly painful for the next while because we need to get this under control. But also, people need to eat. Let's be serious. Yeah. And it is one where don't panic. You do not need to go to Costco and fill your carts with toilet paper. I actually saw that last Thursday. It was happening here. And yeah, like the local stores, it's a ghost. Basically, the shelves are stripped bare of things like pasta and everything like that.
Yeah, my sister actually went to the grocery store specifically to see like the empty shelves. Like to chronicle history.
Yeah, and it is. And there's no reason for it at this stage.
Yeah.
Right now, we are at something where be there. And in the case of something, if you even suspect that you might be infected, go self-isolate. Make sure you do that. Whatever you do, do not go and... Yes, enjoy it. What is it? I know, like Disney Plus, they went and put additional shows up early. So I think Frozen 2 has now available for streaming that you can watch it.
And onward. Not on Disney Plus, but like that's still in theaters technically, but they're releasing it for on demand.
Let's be real. Let's be real. We're all going to go and watch Zootopia 58 times in the next week.
Well,
more than likely, yes.
Come on. Like, that's just a given.
Yeah, I mean, right now, Sarah and I, my wife, we kicked off. Timing happened to be this way, but we just kicked off a gaming channel, and it's like, cool. Now we've got time to do all this.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Swamper, as much as I would love to
totally check that out at Ready Player Dumb.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, but anyways, with that, just be kind. Try to help each other. If you do have, neighbors, anything like that are from a higher risk group, check in on them. Just by phone, preferably. But be on the outlook. And yes, if you see people that need help, and if you can, try. Because this is going to be difficult for everyone. I know my colleagues and I on the side of the community, we're not stopping. We will try. We will keep going at this until it's done. Even like I said, this is outside of my field of expertise. I'm doing what I can, even if it's just offering equipment and analytics, that type of idea. If you can help, do so. Don't panic. This is something where we will get through this, but only together.
The advice of the Hitchhiker's Guide and don't panic.
Don't panic.
Friendly letters.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And, everyone, have a good weekend.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been just an amazing amount of, incredible information.
No problem. As I said, if there are any other questions, there are ways you can get in touch. And for those that are there, yes, I'm still writing Lost Causes. I will get the chapter out. I've got Steve Aguilici. He's got for Nicole and Julius.
Go help save the world first.
Yeah.
Pretty much. All right. You guys have a good evening.
Take care. Well.
So, it sounds like we're in better shape than Zootopia would be.
Yes. Yes, it does.
And I am now requiring Judy wear a full-on plastic bubble at all times because we just can't risk. We just can't risk it.
Protect at all costs.
Oh man, well that was a great amount of information. Not only obviously on the theoretical Zootopia side, but of course on the actual pandemic that's happening right now that we're all going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff.
Woo. So yeah, we might try more like semi-interview, like just bring on a guest sort of thing. We might give that a try a few more times. We'll have to see. Let us know in the comments who you'd like to see, you know?
Yeah.
Because this was definitely interesting.
And
I mean that in the best possible way. Like, I'm not being sarcastic. It's, like, legitimately. Well, till next time. I'm Andy Lagopis.
And I'm AC Racebest.
Thank you for tuning in to Zootopiology, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.